Hevenu Shalom Alechem. Hevenu Shalom Alechem. Hevenu Shalom Alechem. Hevenu Shalom, Shalom, Shalom Alechem.
Welcome to the Beau Show. The song I was singing is well known in the Jewish community as a Hebrew folk song. It is called Hevenu Shalom Alechem, which means we bring peace upon you. I thought this was fitting as the world watches Israel defend itself from attacks by Hamas, the Islamic resistance movement. Hamas's origins go back to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt in 1928. The Brotherhood was established to extend Islamic values beyond the mosque into secular society, especially in political, ideological, and economic terms. The Palestine War in 1948 and creation of the State of Israel created a massive exodus and was the first of the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts over that very small area of land. It is important to remember that Israel's establishment as a state is why other Arab nations invaded the area to prevent Israel from becoming a state. But it was Ahmad Yassin, a quadriplegic Palestinian refugee who was a catalyst in the area in 1973. Because he promoted charity and welfare as a recipient himself, Israel actually gave money to him because they saw him as peaceful. But later, he was arrested for collecting arms. And in the end, he gave his blessing to the formation of Hamas in 1987. This is a fact that seems to have plagued this conflict, that it has been hard to separate the good actors from the bad, even when Israel has tried to be benevolent to the charitable or social welfare of the Palestinian people. The Muslim Brotherhood had refused to engage in violence with Israel, so Hamas's emergence came as a separate entity from the Brotherhood. Yassin was convinced that Israel was trying to destroy Islam, so he concluded that it was Muslims' responsibility to destroy Israel. It seems to me that Israel merely wanted statehood for having inhabited this land for centuries and created the religion of Judaism there, so Hamas's initial goal might have been liberating Palestine, but in totality was to get rid of Israel outright to return to an all-Muslim territory. Mind you, Israel's portion of that land compared to the entire Arab world is infinitesimal. Hamas's aim is to liberate Palestine from Israeli presence and to transform the area into an Islamic state. Hamas has several elements. There is a social welfare wing, a military wing, a security wing, and a media wing. The social welfare division is exactly as it sounds. It is major welfare, but as a result, it creates dependence on the governing body, which of course is militant and a form of resistance in and of itself. Hamas is largely funded by Iran, which is why Iran gets the rap for being the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. Matthew Levitt argues that Hamas grant money to people is subject to a rigorous cost-benefit analysis of how beneficiaries will support Hamas, with those linked to terrorist activities receiving more than others. Israel holds the families of suicide bombers accountable and bulldozes their homes, whereas the families of Hamas activists who have been killed or wounded during militant operations are given an initial one-time grant, varying between $500 and $5,000, together with a $100 monthly allowance. So there you have it. Charitable aspect is really to breed a natural resistance in Palestinians that will be rewarded for any militant martyrdom. Their ideology is the following: to evoke the spirit of jihad or resistance among Palestinians, Arabs, and Muslims, to defend Palestinians and their land against the Zionist occupation and its manifestations, and to liberate Palestinians and their land that was usurped by the Zionist occupation forces and settlers. This is kind of an interesting fact, but Hamas leaders read George H.W. Bush's plan for a New World Order in 1993 as a tacit plan to rid the world of Islam. So in response, Hamas promoted jihad, which they say is zeal for social justice. And I emphasize this because that phrase, social justice, is all too common right here in the USA, and the violence that is not just associated with it, but condoned. We saw this from many leftist politicians. Matthew Levitt claims that Hamas also taps money from corporations, criminal organizations, and financial networks that support terror. The United States, Israel, and the EU have shut down many charities and organs that channel money to Hamas, such as the Holy Land Foundation for Relief. So Hamas has been able to acquire funding under this charity shell, when we know very well what the funding is actually going to. When it comes to financing, Iran stepped up its funding in the 2000s, but Iran preferred direct financing to operative groups rather than charities, requiring video proof of attacks. Much of the Iran funding is said to be channeled through Hezbollah. The Israeli government has allowed millions of dollars from Qatar to be funneled on a regular basis through Israel to Hamas to replace the millions of dollars the Palestinian Authority had stopped transferring. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu explained that letting the money go through Israel meant that it could not be used for terrorism. And this is important because there has been a campaign to paint Israel as the aggressor and the problem, who only kills women and children. Yet, even in recent years, we have seen that Netanyahu is allowing money to get into Gaza for humanitarian purposes rather than militant operations. By about 1990, there was a full-fledged jihad declared against Israel and the greater Zionist enemy everywhere, which of course includes the US. According to Maddie Steinberg, former advisor to Shin Bet and one of Israel's leading experts on Hamas, the 1994 Hebron Mosque massacre of Muslims in prayer by a Jewish settler named Baruch Goldstein laid to rest an internal debate within Hamas on the usefulness of indiscriminate violence. He states this, quote, "In the Hamas writings, there is an explicit prohibition against indiscriminate harm to helpless people. The massacre at the mosque released them from this taboo and introduced a dimension of measure for measure, based on citations from the Quran." So this, of course, brings the religious or liturgical foundations for violence. Article 7 of the Hamas covenant provides the following quotation attributed to Muhammad. Quote, "The day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight the Jews," meaning killing them, "when the Jew will hide behind stones and trees. The stones and trees will say, 'O Muslims, O Abdullah, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him,'" end quote. In reaction to the Stockholm Conference on the Jewish Holocaust held in late January 2000, Hamas issued a press release that it published on its official website, containing the following statements from a senior leader. Quote, "This conference bears a clear Zionist goal, aimed at forging history by hiding the truth about the so-called Holocaust, which is an alleged and invented story with no basis," end quote. In 2006, the US, Russia, European Union, and the UN stated that they would cease assistance to the Palestinian Authority unless they renounced violence and recognized Israel. Hamas refused. Also in 2006, a civil war occurred within Palestine between Hamas and Fatah, leading to all kinds of human rights crimes. You can see that this region can't even get on the same page internally. They don't just fight with Israel, they fight with each other. In May of 2017, Hamas created a new charter that does not call for the destruction of Israel. In the Trump administration, a deal was presented to Israel and to Palestine in a path to move forward that would give about 70% of the West Bank to the Palestinians. It is notable also that Kushner facilitated the Abraham Accords of 2020, a landmark agreement between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and the US. Now that we have a bit of background on this conflict, let's look at the recent activity. A little over a week ago, Hamas rockets were launched into Israel, much to their chagrin, as the Israeli Iron Dome put an incredible display of knocking these rockets down. The Israeli Defense Forces have done a good job of hitting many of Hamas's facilities, and Netanyahu himself is sending the message that this is what happens when you provoke Israel. But remember that this is still a bit of a proxy war since Iran backs Hamas. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, has called Israel a cancerous tumor to be destroyed. Iranian lawmakers have proposed a bill to destroy Israel by 2040. I'm not making this up. This is very real. And Hamas hides behind civilians, using them as human shields. So when the media reports the casualties, many of whom are indeed women and children, which is awful, it fails to recognize that Hamas fired these rockets, as they have in the past, from civilian areas, and they hide amongst civilians, which makes it very hard to distinguish between innocent and guilty. And I find it odd that the media and many Democrats are siding with the Palestinians and, by proxy, Hamas and Iran. Yet one of the first things Biden did was to try to re-engage in the Iran deal. And now he tries to call for a ceasefire in Gaza, which looks totally impotent. His own party is breaking with him over this issue. Hamas has launched over 3,000 rockets into Israel. Does Israel not have a right to defend itself? Israel had been allowing medical and supply aid trucks to get through, but because bombs were going off at checkpoints, they had to cease that. That's all on Hamas. Netanyahu had a testy exchange with CBS News host John Dickerson on Face the Nation regarding the civilian casualties and targeted Israeli strikes. Watch.
No people are killed. Now imagine, ask yourself, how is that possible? You see these high-rise towers that are used by Hamas over and over again, they collapse and no one is killed. Why does that happen? Because we, unlike Hamas, take special precautions to tell people, leave the building, leave the premises. We make sure that everyone is gone before we bring down those terrorist facilities. And that's the difference between Israel and Hamas. They deliberately target our cities, deliberately target our civilians. They glorify the death of children and civilians and old people. They are happy with it. You know, if Hamas would simply move these rockets out of the civilian areas, if they move their command posts out of these homes and offices, then there wouldn't be any problem.
Let me ask you, Mr. Prime Minister.
But the fact is, they're sending thousands of rockets on our cities with a specific purpose of murdering our civilians from these places.
Let me ask you, Mr.
What would you do?
Let me ask
if it happened to Washington or to New York? You know damn well what you do.
Let me ask you,
you do at the very least what we're doing.
This again begs the question I keep asking about the media. Why are they inserting themselves in the narrative? Journalists should always push back and ask the tough questions. But you can tell that John Dickerson was at times trying to interrupt the Prime Minister and didn't seem to be satisfied with his answer. What Dickerson fails to understand is that Netanyahu is explaining how targeted the IDF has been. And they go after Hamas tunnels and infrastructure and financial and intelligence hubs. The fact that Hamas shared a building with the Associated Press is certainly weird. And listen to constant hack John Oliver on this.
There is a real tendency, particularly in America, to both sides this situation. And I'm not saying that there aren't some areas where that's warranted, but it's important to recognize there are also areas where it's simply not. Both sides are firing rockets, but one side has one of the most advanced militaries in the world. Both sides are suffering heartbreaking casualties, but one side is suffering them exponentially. And it's not like the US is operating from the moral high ground here. It's obviously no stranger to drone-striking weddings and saying, we were just trying to target enemy combatants. This country has blood on its hands too. And look, if you believe Israel's actions are warranted and proportionate this week, you're welcome to try and make that argument. But we have got to start having this conversation honestly, and falling back on convenient sanitized terms like real estate disputes and airstrikes on militants feels a little disingenuous when what you're describing is forcing people from the homes they've lived in for decades and killing civilians and children. And again, none of this frees Hamas from responsibility, but Hamas doesn't represent all Palestinians, just as what Israel is doing right now doesn't represent all Israelis or indeed Jewish people. Lots is complicated here.
John Oliver is creating a lopsided argument, sympathizing with Hamas and Palestinians because Israel had a better military and the Iron Dome? Are you kidding me? He's trying to say it's he said, she said, when Hamas hides among its most vulnerable citizens, such as women and children. This is lopsided. One side launches rockets at will and hides among its poorest and its defenseless, and then gets international sympathy when women and children die. Talk about human rights violations. Why is Oliver so absurdly pro-Palestine on this? Is he getting paid? This is the nonsense this guy puts out all the time. So John, if you want to have a conversation, as you say, have an intelligent one. You shortchange your viewers when you provide no context and defend Hamas for not having a great military while they bomb not just Israelis, mind you, civilians, but also their own people when it's politically convenient. And then they try to hide behind charity by giving money to their poor the way that Pablo Escobar did in Colombia to get love and dependence. John Oliver can't provide insight into this because he doesn't know enough about it. His Iron Dome are the United States of America and HBO. It's interesting that he is always this barking chihuahua for the left, guising himself in what he thinks is comedy. Go broadcast your show from Gaza, John. Have some Hamas generals on your show. See how that works out for you. This conflict is indeed a complicated one that has been going on for not just decades, probably centuries. But the U.S. has presented some opportunities for peace, but Hamas will not accept. And as Netanyahu said, what would we do if rockets were launched at D.C. or New York? Sit back and do nothing? Of course not. We do what we did with Al-Qaeda, which is not just to try to rid the world of them, but also their financial sources. It shocks me that the media and the left would back Hamas or even be sympathetic to them. Yes, the innocent who die always deserve our sympathy. But Hamas has placed those innocents in harm's way, and it needs to be viewed through that lens. And I will pass on international affairs advice from John Oliver. He's a liberal first and a comedian second. In the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, only one of those two parties seeks the total destruction of the other. This holy land where Israel is, especially Jerusalem, is also a holy site for Christianity and for Islam. But only one of those three religions seems to justify its violence through its holy text. To stop the violence, you have to be willing to compromise, just like the United Arab Emirates has done with Israel. It is possible, but not if you start from the position of decimating Israel as a state. Hevenu Shalom Aleichem. I'm Beau, and that's the show.
Shalom Aleichem, Malachi Hashari, Malachi Elion. Mi Melech, Malachi Hamlakim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Bocham LaShalom, Malachi HaShalom, Malachi Elion. Mi Melech Malachi Hamlakim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.